Well, on to today's program. What role should government play in regulating advertising? If regulation is appropriate, where do we draw the line? The debate surrounding First Amendment rights rages on. Wally Snyder, president of the American Advertising Federation, is with us today to address these issues and to report on numerous pieces of legislation and pending Supreme Court cases that would restrict the flow of commercial speech. Mr. Snyder joined the AAF in 1985, following a 16-year career with the Federal Trade Commission. While he was with the FTC, he first served as a trial attorney and subsequently became principal advisor to the Commission on advertising issues, including public policies raised by government regulation. Now, as president of the American Advertising Federation, Wally is responsible for serving its 52,000 affiliate membership by representing their views and concerns on public issues affecting advertising. Please join me in welcoming Wally Snyder to the City Club.
Thank you very much, Patty. I'm honored to be here in the land of clean air and basketball, and to have a chance to talk to the City Club of Portland about the business of advertising. It's a business I'm proud to represent for many reasons, some of which you may not think about when you reach for the zap button on your remote control. Let me begin by naming them. First, our industry has a positive effect to the tune of $120 billion a year on the national and the local economies. Second, the contributions we make to our communities through the public service efforts are enormous and growing. Third, and perhaps most important, advertising is a worthy tribute to the principle of free speech and the free flow of information that serves as the foundation of our democracy. The Supreme Court has determined that advertisers have a First Amendment right to advertise as long as the claims are truthful, and that you and I as consumers have a First Amendment right to receive that commercial information. But we're fighting very, very hard to protect that right. As you are aware, a great number of companies, both large and small, make up the advertising industry. There are the advertisers, the manufacturers and retailers who sell goods and services. There are the advertising agencies, which create and place advertising on behalf of those manufacturers and retailers. And finally, there are the media, which disseminate advertising to consumers by way of radio, TV, newspapers, magazine, direct mail, outdoor, and point-of-purchase materials. Everything from menus and posters to hang tags. Other support and supply industries are also crucial to the making of ads, including commercial photography, illustration, graphic design, and printing. You have many advertising businesses, of course, right here in Oregon. And together they not only provide thousands of jobs and attract thousands of customers, but they also focus considerable attention on this state. As you well know, Portland is not about to let New York consider itself the advertising mecca any longer. Nike not only knows Bo, Nike knows better. The American Advertising Federation is a grassroots organization that brings together all these components of the advertising industry. And our mission is twofold. First, we are charged with defending the First Amendment rights of advertisers to truthfully market their goods and services. Our second mission is to help educate legislators and the public about the value of advertising. We work on behalf of our members and the ad industry, of course, but I truly believe that the ultimate beneficiary of our efforts and of advertising itself is the consumer. The irony, of course, is that most consumers are unaware of just how much they benefit from advertising. In fact, some probably have a very negative view of the commercials that interrupt their favorite programs and the ads that line their bird cages. Now, this is understandable, and it's nothing new. Will Rogers was once asked by a piano manufacturer to write just a short testimonial for its instruments. He was unwilling, however, to endorse any product that he could not put to the test. That's not a bad standard to follow. So Will Rogers wrote back to the manufacturer a very simple note. "Dear sirs," he said, "I guess your pianos are the best I ever leaned against. Yours truly, Will Rogers." When an industry is as visible as ours is, remember, we spend $120 billion a year to make it that way, the false or misleading ads stand out and are easy to ridicule. But our industry is a target of much undeserved abuse from critics who claim either that advertising serves no useful purpose or that it is to blame for all social ills. According to one group, advertising is ultimately responsible for, and I'm quoting here, environmental degradation, ill health, inattention to traditional values and activities, social inequities, and perpetual personal debt. Not, as my teenage son Charlie would say. Advertising clearly is getting a bad rap, and it's AAF's job to educate the public and lawmakers about the true and positive nature of our business. Think just a moment about how you use, not read or watch, but use advertising in your daily lives. Been to a movie lately? Well, how did you find out what was playing and when and where? Anybody wearing anything today that you bought on sale? How did you find out about that sale? How many of you shopped the ads the first time when you bought a new car? If anyone here is on a budget, heaven forbid, I'll bet you know what the grocery store specials are this week. If you take a look at the America's oldest newspapers, which have been around as long as the Declaration of Independence, you'll find that they are full of ads. Our country's founders believed that ads were free speech aimed at encouraging commercial transactions. And they recognized how important this form of speech was in creating an economy and putting a brand new nation on its feet. Now, yesterday I toured your own American Advertising Museum here in Portland. And I was impressed with the usefulness of those early colonial ads that I saw. And I certainly urge all of you, if you haven't, to visit that museum, which really illustrates and demonstrates how advertising has played its role in the development of our country. Advertising, above all, provides consumers with information about the products and services that they are interested in, including all kinds of information on price, also information on availability, styles, and what have you. Advertising does not coerce consumers into buying goods they do not want. Now, thanks to your advertising in Portland, I and hundreds of others who will be attending the National Advertising Conference here this week will know what to do, where to eat, and where to shop in Portland. As I was out on a walk this morning, I came upon one of those ads that I thought was very descriptive and very useful to me. It said, "People's Cafe, good coffee, no back talk." The kind of place I'd like to go. Advertising encourages product information and improvement by providing a springboard for the launch of new products and services. It permits new and small businesses to enter and survive a highly competitive marketplace. It supports the news, entertainment, political debates, and yes, sporting events that pour freely into American homes. I don't suppose, for example, that any of you have tuned any NBA games recently. Advertising is the only source of revenue for broadcasters, and it's the primary source of revenue for newspapers and magazines. Don't make the mistake that a friend of mine, mother-in-law, once made when she canceled her subscription to the Sunday paper. When my friend asked why, the mother-in-law replied, "Because I'm tired of paying for all those ads." Well, let it be known that without advertising, no one could afford to buy papers or magazines on a regular basis. And if advertising is reduced, so too will be the quality and amount of news and information that they can carry. Remember also that advertising helps fund minority points of views in specialized publications, both national and local. In short, it makes possible, I believe, a free press in the United States. Now, even economists have come to appreciate the value of advertising. Although someone famous once said that if you laid all of the economists in the United States end to end, it would probably be a good thing. But economic studies have established, contrary to the claims of our critics, that advertising actually results in lowering consumer prices. A Federal Trade Commission study several years ago showed that the average cost of eyeglasses in states that restricted advertising was about $95. In states that allowed optometrists to advertise, the quality was just as high, but the eyeglasses were only $72, a whopping 24% less. Most important, perhaps, especially during this economic recession, is the fact that advertising produces jobs and growth. In 1990, 56 billion of the $120 billion that advertising expenditures pumped into the economy went directly into local markets. And advertising can help America recover if the government will only recognize its benefits and not impose any unnecessary restrictions. Now, AAF has not been shy about taking this message to elected officials. In fact, we recently ran an ad in national publications such as the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Parade, Time, and others. And it was an open letter to President Bush reminding him and Congress that advertising is an economic force that stimulates the economy. But that's not all. Few industries do more to directly benefit their communities than the advertising industry. In fact, AAF has an annual awards program which will take place in Portland this Sunday to recognize the very best public service campaigns. Countless issues have been addressed by our local affiliates, including drunk driving and other forms of alcohol abuse, AIDS in education, child abuse, illiteracy. Advertising professionals donate their time and talent to develop those effective, hard-hitting campaigns, and media donate millions of dollars worth of time and space to disseminate these messages. The advertising industry also recognizes its responsibility to provide reliable and accurate information to consumers. We believe that false advertising has no value nor place in our industry. The AAF vigorously supports the National Advertising Division of the Council of Better Business Bureaus and many local advertising review programs across the country. These are programs through which the ad industry polices itself against deceptive ad claims, and they've earned the praise of the Federal Trade Commission and many state attorneys general. Well, now I've spent many minutes explaining the benefits, as I see them, of advertising and of a healthy ad industry. But these benefits are only possible if advertising remains free from unnecessary regulations and restrictions and unburdened by harmful taxation. Now let me illustrate this latest threat that we face by citing the wisdom of British chemist and physicist Michael Faraday. Faraday, who, among other things, discovered benzene and made the first electric generator, used to baffle people because he seemed to pursue knowledge for its own sake. William Gladstone was watching him one day and for the life of him could not figure out what practical results could come of the experiment that Faraday was doing. Of what use could this discovery be, he finally asked. Now, Faraday was no dummy. He turned to the statesman, he said, "Why, you will soon be able to tax it." Now, I know that you Oregonians are none too fond of taxes either. But unfortunately, lawmakers, desperate for revenue, have focused their hungry eyes on the advertising industry all across the country. Granted, state legislatures are under unprecedented pressure. 36 states have had to raise taxes to balance their books in 1991, 36 states. And in 1992, it looks just as ominous. California, for one, is now projecting a $7.2 billion deficit, right on the tail of a $14 billion deficit last year. Of course, these hard-pressed states are looking at new sources of revenue, and advertising is high on the list. Last year, 17 states considered taxing or restricting advertising, and already 15 states are thinking along the same lines this year, in spite of the fact that new taxes are none too popular in an election year. But let me tell you, advertising is not the way to go. You may remember the Florida debacle in 1987 when a broad-based ad tax was passed. Well, 30-some national advertisers reduced or simply stopped running ads in the state of Florida. This cost our local broadcasters $12 million in the first quarter of the tax. The experiment was such a disaster that the legislature repealed the tax after only 6 months in existence. The evidence, we think, is overwhelming. Ad taxes just don't work, yet states still continue to try. Yes, even in the state of Florida. As that philosopher and great baseball player of my childhood, Yogi Berra, once said, "It's deja vu all over again." Fortunately, our 52,000 AAF members around the country are alert and organized to fight these tax assaults as quickly as they arise. Our local associations, aided by the sound economic and political arguments assembled in our Washington office, defeated ad tax bills last year in New Mexico, New York, Minnesota, South Dakota, Kansas, Missouri, and Rhode Island. But the threat continues. And we face an even greater threat, and that's the threat of losing First Amendment protection for commercial free speech. I hope that by now I've convinced you, or some of you, as to the economic benefits of advertising. Why then is advertising under such an attack today? Let me give you some examples. Last year, a congressional bill would have allowed truthful tobacco advertising, but it would have banned in those ads the use of colors, scenery, people, and slogans. And the top one-third of the ad would have been the existing warning. Also, legislation presently on Capitol Hill would allow the government to dictate the precise wording and tone of health warnings that would be required in all alcoholic beverage advertising, including broadcast, even though this information is already on labels. And some of the disclosures would be 12 seconds long. Some are 12 to 15 seconds, which would make it impossible really to do these in broadcast ads, which would effectively eliminate beer and wine advertising from the airwaves, which in turn would have a real effect on sports programming and other types of entertainment that we now appreciate. Now, the fact of the matter is that there are some regulators who don't want consumers to have certain information, especially for products that are in disfavor. Last year in Washington State, for example, just to the north, we fought a proposal that would prohibit all alcoholic beverage advertising if there were any chance at all that it might induce underage people to drink. Now, what did the proponents of the bill have in mind exactly? Well, they didn't want any scenes showing people in bars, and they didn't want any scenes showing people dancing, and on and on. So what's happening here? What we're really talking about is content control of advertising. Content control, when you talk about the First Amendment, is one of those really dirty words. People who don't like certain products are trying to eliminate them by controlling what can be said in advertising. And if they have their way, ultimately, there will be no advertising. Now remember, I said at the outset that advertising that is deceptive should be banned and prohibited. We're talking about advertising for these products and services that are disfavored, which is truthful advertising, and that's where the content control is going these days. When it comes to the First Amendment, I'm a purist. I'm also a lawyer, but I don't believe that anyone, no matter what level of government, legal or public status they happen to have, should have the authority to choose which products deserve the right of free speech. Now, clearly, this is not a concept accepted by everyone, perhaps not everyone in this audience. But my question is, where do we draw the line? Who makes the decision on what we see and hear, and what catastrophic precedent could be set? Everyone sees ads for products of which they, as individuals, do not approve. And for the sake of argument, let's just concede the easy ones. We'll disband advertising for a few of them. No harm done in banning just a little advertising. Even legal products can be bad for you. But having banned a little, what about a little more? Red meat, perhaps, or food products high in cholesterol? They're bad for people with heart problems. And while we're at it, people do eat too much salt. Get those pretzels off the air. Then we run into the two-edged swords. For example, casino and lottery advertising, for example. Bad for compulsive gamblers, but the winnings fund in significant amounts education, environmental causes, and human services in more than half our states. And contraceptive advertising, although still controversial, promises benefits that many members of the public seek. I am deeply committed to the principle that any exception to the First Amendment, protection of truthful advertising, will surely begin its dismantling. I believe we all benefit from advertising. We are rational people, well able to make independent choices and better commercial decisions than a government censor could make for us, as long as we are adequately informed. Now, we trust Americans to make political and religious judgments on their own. Why would we assume that they are incapable of making commercial ones? And that is not easy to say. That is not to say there is no need for regulation. Not only does the AAF have its own self-regulatory system and policies, but we also fully support the Federal Trade Commission in its efforts to prohibit deceptive advertising. Health and safety issues are a case in point. The Federal Trade Commission has the power, and it's using it to stop health claims that are false or not substantiated, and we applaud those efforts. But advertising itself is not evil. It is essentially a good and decent part of the American economic system. It creates the sales that provide the profits that drive our economy and supply our tax base. Advertising does not make people buy what they don't need. Instead, it represents the freedom to make choices based on adequate information. And finally, advertising is not an interruption in magazines, newspapers, and basketball games. It makes those media possible. And it is a right that is guaranteed by the First Amendment and that can and should be protected as one of our essential freedoms. I appreciate your having me here today and listening to me state my opinions as an American citizen on behalf of our advertising professionals. I want you to know that we pay our way, and as fellow businessmen and women and fellow consumers, we thank you for your support. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'd ask for our first question from Susan Stone, member of the Board of Governors.
Wally, if you looked into your crystal ball, what would you see for advertising, say, in the next 10 years? both in terms of legislation and will we see any cigarette ads? Will we continue to see ads for sweetened products? And what kind of new advertising vehicles will there be now that very few people are using matchbooks?
Well, that's 3 questions. As far as government regulation, I do not see any letting up on our industry. My personal view is that many of the issues that we're contending with and confronting at the national level will be taken up by individual state governments. That's already starting to happen. And I really believe that we will be finding ourselves in the next 10 years working with state legislators, regulators, attorneys general to advance our industry and also the public. I also think our industry will become much more proactive in the sense of working to solve problems than in simply always being at the barricades fighting, resisting. The difficulty is trying to shift from that defensive posture into a proactive one, but that's one thing we've given each of our local affiliates the mission of doing. The challenges will be there. Advertising will be present. I think that advertising will be much more personal, and I think it will be, the capability will be that it will be able to direct it to each of us in a very effective way. And we may be in a position where our companies can direct advertising mostly to those consumers who are interested in those particular products and not be in a position of trying to reach other people who aren't. So I think it's going to be a really exciting time for the industry. And I want it to be a time in which the industry contributes to the welfare of the country as well.
Bob Wheel, member of the Business and Labor Standing Committee. A recently released rap song urges its listeners in very explicit terms to kill a cop, kill a policeman. Time Warner, the publisher, said this is an exercise in free speech. Accepting this as free speech and accepting we don't want government regulation, does the publisher have any responsibility not to promote and advertise this kind of thing?
Well, this is the type of issue that I think is the frontline First Amendment issue. It is a painful and difficult issue for a publisher as well, to make those type decisions. And I'm aware that Time Warner faced it and said that while it certainly did not condone that message, its concern was that if those type things were prohibited, it would have a negative effect on the First Amendment protection. That's where I get into this point about being a purist. I deplore statements like that, and everyone should speak out against them, and I'm sure that many publishers will speak out against them editorially. But I really feel that there's a lot of self-regulation going on here. We're asking our members, and I'm not speaking now political speak, that is not advertising you're speaking of. That, of course, is another type of speech. We certainly are asking our members to self-regulate and to make some of those decisions easier so the government will not be involved. But I have to say that I really have to support the right of people to make these statements, especially in that area which is even more protected than commercial speech. Deplore it. It's a painful decision for the publisher. I'm sure they will editorialize against it, but I think that's the way it should come out, is where they were. Yes, sir.
Okay, I have a 3-part question as well. My name is Tom Slayton. I'm a City Club member. Number one, some time ago there was a set of ads which pictured an elephant sitting atop a car to demonstrate just how structurally sound this car was. I was wondering whether the AAF either disciplined any of the advertisers or the manufacturer in any way, since you referred to a self-regulatory mechanism. Number two, it seems important that we have, the fairness doctrine has disappeared. Yeah. Maybe the advertisers could see to it that the media started introducing, or that the government brought back the fairness doctrine, and that might help the advertisers out a little bit. And number three, you talked about products in disfavor. A lot of the networks and local stations will not play any ads for condoms, for example. What is the AAF doing about that?
Well, the first question is to self-regulation. The way our process works is we accept both consumer and competitor complaints, and we have both a national and local program. I'm not aware of the ad that you speak of. I don't know if it was shown locally here, but there's several ways it could come to our group's attention, either through a consumer or a competitor complaint, and about 2,800 of those complaints have been resolved in the last 10 years or so, and in almost every case where there's been a conclusion that the ad was deceptive, it has been voluntarily removed by the advertiser. And I would also say that the final resolution is that if it is not removed, the policy then is to pass it on to the government with the information that we have collected for the government to take action. So it is a pretty strong program. Our position would be if that ad were deceptive, then it would be a good candidate, for self-regulation. Second point as to the fairness doctrine, required opposing points of view to be put on the air, and it was only applied as to broadcasters because of the theory that broadcasters are using the public airwaves and should then present responsible points of view. One thing that happened because of it, some people believe there were a lot less controversial things on broadcast because of the difficulty that broadcasters had in trying to administer it, of trying to find the opposing point of view, and some really tried to do that. The demise, you're right, I mean, the FCC several years ago rescinded the fairness doctrine. There is a concern in Congress, and many are trying to restate it. The basic point, I think, is well taken, though. The publisher media should try to put as many points of view on the air as possible. Third point, what was the third question?
You're not getting disfavored products. Affirmatively working to get disfavored products like condoms and ads.
The first proposition is that the government itself should not be discouraging speech about particular products. That's what the essence of my remarks. I think the second point I would say, in my personal viewpoint, is that we should see as much truthful advertising as possible because I feel it is informative. My personal views as to condom advertising, I think that would probably be useful if done in a particular manner, maybe a particular place on the television band. But again, I think that the publisher and the media have to make that decision based upon the local market as to what they will accept, because they also have a responsibility as to making sure that they're fully representing their audience. And again, this is a tough question, and I've been told that the so-called ethical questions, and this may bottom out on that, are more difficult for them than deception questions. There are more audience concerns expressed about products such as that than there are about deception. So my personal view would be to encourage tasteful and truthful ads, but I think the publisher media has to make that final decision.
Edith Zabin, member of the City Club. You spoke at length about the value of advertising, the contents of it, and what it does for our economy. I'm in hearty accord with all of this. Mm-hmm. However, how do you feel about municipal authority over the placing of outdoor advertising? This reached quite serious proportions in this city not very long ago.
Well, we have been involved in fighting on behalf of outdoor media, first of all in the area of content control, because there are bills in various states that would simply permit billboards for particular products, alcoholic beverages or whatnot, and that is clearly within the mission that I stated here of fighting that. Now, we have also opposed efforts for state and localities to take down billboards without, paying just compensation to the companies. And this is where this issue often comes up, in which a municipality or a state will say, we want to take down the billboards, but not pay the company for that loss of property. And that's where this effort has been, and we have opposed those type things. I recognize certainly there is a zoning authority and responsibility that every city and state has as to where you permit certain things. But we would oppose content control, and we would oppose not allowing the companies to get compensation for what they lose.
And you aren't particularly concerned about them being very rigid about where they're placed when they're in places that do no one any harm, and the advertiser a great deal of good.
Well, what I tried to indicate was my preference is for more speech and more outlets for consumers. And we have been involved in several states where we have fought regulations that sought to do what you're concerned about. And it's an issue that's been very, very important in Congress, and just this past year, attempts were made to make it easier to take down billboards around the country without compensation. That was defeated. So it's a form of advertising that I feel is important for consumers, and we support it.
Ted Kay, City Club member. An as yet undeclared presidential candidate has proposed to limit severely the practice of government officials pursuing second careers in the industries they regulate. Since such a restriction would have impaired your career, would you please comment on this idea?
I actually, when I was at the Federal Trade Commission, was under a limitation of, there have been laws in place which prohibit certain types of work that one can do. For example, I was prohibited, and probably forever, for representing any company before the Federal Trade Commission that had been involved in a dispute, that dispute when I was there. So I have never, since I left the Federal Trade Commission, been involved in any legal action, nor have I represented any company in a lawsuit, and that is a prohibition which I happen to feel is wise. What I did when I transferred into the industry was essentially to work on legislative issues, something I had not worked on at the Federal Trade Commission. But to answer your question, I think it is well-founded to have restrictions that prohibit people from this revolving door from going in and out of government. I worked as a public servant for 16 and a half years, and I thought it was an honorable job and profession, and I never would do anything to tarnish that reputation that I still have at that agency, and I believe that unannounced candidate is right.
Paul Milius, club member. I'd like to address, I guess, inconsistencies, contradictions, if you will. We advertise a whole range, ad nauseum almost literally, of products that deal with a variety of fairly intimate physical functions, from hemorrhoids to menstrual problems and God knows what all else. And yet condoms seem to fall into some special category where we don't touch it. And the advertisers and the media all sort of go, we can't possibly advertise these things. And there are two questions. That's one. Secondly, it is a conventional wisdom, if you will, that editors are reluctant to address controversial ideas, especially controversial political ideas, because they fear and often cite that advertisers will pull the advertising if they print this particular story. Do you see a contradiction between advertising seeking prevention under the First Amendment when advertising is used to suppress what might be controversial, either political or social ideas?
Well, taking your second question statement first, advertising should never be used to suppress political speech, in my view. Advertisers certainly have a right to choose where they place their message, but my experience has been they're going to place the message where they get they reach the audience that they wish to reach. They may not be happy with a particular article or whatnot, but it seems to me that they have to make their decisions on economic justification, and that's what they have to do, because when you're in a competitive marketplace, as a media buyer or as a account executive, that's the question that's going to be asked, is, how are we doing our sales? Clearly, advertising, should not be controlling editorial comment, and I hope that it isn't. I can't accept the statement as, that some say that starkly that it is. So, I think I'd stand with you on that. As to what was the first point? The second point I've just addressed. What was the first?
About personal products.
Well, again, I stated my personal opinion that consumers benefit from information that's truthful about all products and services. One way the networks and others have tried to deal with this issue, and really what they're trying to do is to balance their audience interest. And as I said before, I've been told they get many complaints about products that are advertised. They've tried to do it sometimes in where they place these commercials. That has been somewhat of a solution after 9 o'clock, after 10 o'clock, or whatever. The theory being that you're not reaching a younger audience or whatever. Those are clumsy. They don't work very well. It's an attempt to try to balance the interest. All I can say is that I would encourage personally the media to take commercials that are truthful for products and services that consumers need information on. And I say that with the knowledge that I'm not in a position to have to make that ultimate decision. There's a tension there, but there's a tension they have to face.
Dan Goldie, City Club member. You stated right at the outset that you felt very vigorously about the importance of the First Amendment defense here. I wonder if you turn this around and address this from the other angle. There are a whole series of items out there in an area of public controversy now about ads that people feel are targeted at specific groups, like Joe Camel, targeted to get kids to smoke, certain beers with heavy alcoholic content that the Afro-American community feels are targeted for their groups, the big flap that occurred in Thailand over cigarette advertising. Would you address, please, the question of where you do think that advertising goes too far, and what that perimeter is where some regulation is in order?
Yes. Well, I think the standard that I mentioned is deception. And I think that if an ad is directed for an adult product to an underage audience, that is within the purview of regulation. And that is the way the government treats it. That is the way the Federal Trade Commission has always treated that issue. If a company were to direct messages to an underage audience, to children, the federal government has more than enough authority to take action, and in the past, they have. So I think that's where I would place that standard. Now, the issue again gets into a question of what do we mean by targeting? Because some people would say that if you put a beer ad in a program, a sports program, where you have a number of children in the audience, and you will, that's targeting. Some would say that if you had a cigarette ad in Sports Illustrated, which has a large readership of children, that's targeting. I don't believe that. And I believe if that's the standard, then we will have gone way too far in terms of protected speech for adults. The fact of the matter is Sports Illustrated has a readership that is adults and very significant and so forth. So I guess the question comes down to is looking at each of those cases on a case-by-case basis and making a decision as to whether a particular ad has gone into that camp. And I fully would support government action. The point that troubles me is blanket type, proactive pronouncements that you can't do certain things, when we know in many cases, in most cases, there will not be a problem. So I think you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis and take vigorous action when there's a problem.
Ray Polani, a City Club member. You mentioned self-regulation and the effectiveness of it. I guess if it really would be effective, you probably wouldn't have any claims against it. So the mere fact that you do get claims proves that self-regulation works in a fashion, but certainly not perfectly. And I think we have to remember that self-regulation of a system where profit is basically the determinant is bound to have some serious problems. So given that we're working with a less than perfect system, we obviously need a certain amount of regulation. And I think the purpose of the regulation would be to prevent the occurrence of misleading and untruth and false advertising that might lead to profit, but at a serious detriment of the public and so on. The thing that comes to mind when we talk about regulation, I spent 25 years of my life in the savings and loan industry. I was fortunate to leave it before it was completely deregulated, and we all know what happened and what's it going to cost every single one of us. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's... Maybe you want to comment on regulation.
Yes, well, I agree with you that regulation is necessary of business and is necessary for advertising. And my belief is that without a strong regulator in advertising, self-regulation would be impossible. I mean, you have to have that cop on the beat, and that has always been our position. And we have supported a strong Federal Trade Commission. One concern we have had is that it's a bit cumbersome when our members have to try to be regulated by 50 different states. And we prefer a federal standard. We worked very hard in the environmental area and others to have the federal government develop that standard. But your proposition is right. There needs to be a regulator, and I think you said it exactly as the Federal Trade Commission would, to prohibit false and misleading advertising. And that includes advertising that does not convey enough information to qualify the claim. And that's necessary. What self-regulation can do, quite frankly, is within those standards much more effectively and quickly resolve an issue. One of these issues at the FTC may take 3 or 4 years in a lawsuit. Self-regulation can really bring that down within 3 or 4 months. But I agree with your proposition.
Hi, Jeannie Dodson, Edgar's City Club member. This is not a question, it's not a comment, I would like to just share and then like your response. Truth in advertising. How come everybody who's smoking cigarettes and advertising is healthy? Are healthy? Truth. You're talking about how do you regulate things, or what should be on the air or what shouldn't be on the air, what shouldn't be in print. Condoms are no-no, but Joe Cool Camel is all right. Are you then saying you're going to have public opinion ruling what is okay and what is not okay? And I'm concerned about that. If public opinion gets to the point that all you have to do is rally around an issue and one public opinion says, no, we don't want condoms, and another public opinion says, no, we don't want Joe Camel, you are in essence going to get a really sporadic kind of phenomena.
Yeah.
And what is that going to impact on free speech?
Yeah. That would be the antithesis of what I believe. What I've stated is...
I'm not saying you believe it, but
Yeah.
I'm seeing it happening. I'm seeing it happening.
Yeah, and what I was about to say is that sort of vote would be highly inappropriate because it could take away from a minority group, someone who happens to be in the minority in a view, important information. And one place that it comes up in is when certain people do not like various programs, and they then attempt to, through boycotts, force the advertiser to not advertise on those programs. I think that's a major problem. And I think it's an attempt to control what we have a right to expect in this country, is a chance to be informed about those things that we wish to be informed about. I think that this is where the whole crucible we are in the 90s and going into the next century is we have a lot of competing voices and forces. And my point is that we should have all of them and not have the government taking straw ballots or making decisions as to who's going to win and who's going to lose.
I think I'd also like to know, is the advertising industry asking this question themselves about what are we finally doing? What is the long-term goal? It's not just we have $1 million contract with such a company in order to make money. Is there some discussion in your profession about, is it ethical to do some of the things we're doing?
Well, yes, there is. And the question that I would raise, and with our conference here, is as we go into the 90s, new time of challenge, how can we participate in growth of the economy and in social and helping people that are having problem areas? And that is an ethical question. I believe also in higher integrity for our industry, and we want to be involved in those areas, and we want to do the right thing, and we want to do it in public service and in other areas. And we're discussing that very thing in this conference this week.
That's
Thank you.
Wally, just one last quick written question for you. This refers to broadcasting. Does the volume go up when the ad comes on?
The answer is, according to the Federal Communications Commission, no.
Wally, thanks very much for joining us today. I'm not sure what the future of advertising will be in 10 years, but I'm sure the debate surrounding the First Amendment will still be with us. Thanks again.